Welcome to the Crocodile School podcast with Hylke Faber, transformational coach and founder of Growth Leaders Network, an award-winning author of Taming Your Crocodiles, and Carson Heady, best-selling author of Salesman on Fire and sales director at Microsoft, as they explore together how we stay connected to and lead from our best selves. Where do we find the wherewithal to choose again and respond from our best selves, instead of giving into fear-based reactivity, especially when challenged? How do we tame our crocodiles, those fear-driven voices that want to protect our ego at all cost? How do we become what we would like the world to become? Allow yourself to become present and enjoy this episode of the Crocodile School podcast.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you all again here today. I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Hylke Faber. This is episode 7. These happen so quickly, and I'm really amped up for this one, and I hope it shows. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and as I was rereading the text, so we always go back to this work is centered around Taming Your Crocodiles, Unlearn Fear, and Become a True Leader. As I was rereading the text, what really was resonating for me was just how aligned my feelings about present time were with what Hylke was writing when he crafted this book, but also how timely this message is for leaders. And that's what I think is so beautiful about this. So episode 7, we're talking today about truth inquiry, which is really us taking a repository of some of these crocodilian voices that we're getting that tell us we can't achieve this goal, we can't meet this quota, we can't find talented individuals to recruit and hire, and it challenges those at the very core as we manage to address why we have these beliefs, stop being the victim in those moments, and turn some of those beliefs on their head and start listening to what the owls or the wisdom will tell us. Hylke, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am really good and happy to be here with you and all of you today to think about truth. And to me, the capital T truth is like a corkscrew. It almost looks like a corkscrew and can visualize it as a corkscrew. It goes right in and it helps to free ourselves from those things that are not true about ourselves, and so that what is true can actually come to the foreground. And it's interesting when we start looking at what is true about ourselves, we meet a lot of things about ourselves that we believe that are not true just because somebody told us that, or we interpreted that, or society says that, or whatever. There's a lot of rubble, which we call crocodiles, that you could say is the bad news, or maybe part of human evolution, that we're just in that. And then there's the part that comes to the surface when we allow ourselves to almost like exhale. It's like, who would I be without all those beliefs? The other thing I'd like to say about this by way of started is truth is such a universal capacity. It's in all of us. We know when we think something or say something that is true, comes from a true place, and we also know when we come from a place that is not true. And I was taught this little trick that I'll just start off with today is just think about your age for a second, just to test that truth barometer we have. Now, first, I'd like us to let's do this together. If you're listening, Carson, let's do it with me. Think about what your age is and say to yourself what your current age is. And my current age is, I would say, I'm 51. See, my birthday was just recently. I'm 51. Okay. So say that to yourself, what age you are. And now, tell yourself a little lie. So I'm going to tell myself that I'm 49. I'm 49. So, Carson, what do you notice in yourself when you tell yourself a little lie?
Anytime that you state something that you know to be untrue, and especially is the opposite of something that you have just stated, there's an unsettling feeling. You know immediately that it isn't true.
Yeah. So there's something in us that knows truth from not true. And part of this is to learn to listen to that and use that capacity for truth to get closer to what we actually truly are, and then operate and lead from that place. So that's by way of introduction.
One of the things that you talked about, and I want to really explore the tree today, right? So the tree is the questions that you're able to work through as you address some of these crocodilian whispers that can turn into screams. Obviously, you want to prevent that from happening, but some of the things that we tell ourselves, and there's some that are deep rooted, right, in how we were brought up, and even how our parents were brought up, right? It really resonated with me as I reread this chapter this week, thinking about like that. Hey, I'm an only child in a small town, and I've got two overachieving parents. So if I'm not producing some kind of results, if I don't have my roadmap mapped out, if I'm not, making them proud, then I'm not seeing and feeling the love. And it's no fault of theirs. It's, something that was ingrained in them. It's, you produce to get that love or that recognition. As you grow up, that can look like different things, but there's that very real fear of, hey, if I take my foot off the gas pedal for even 1 second and stop driving results or don't appear to know exactly what I'm doing, then what good am I? What value am I?
Yes.
And that's a real fear that I think a lot of us are facing. And I think the other one, as we kind of walk through the tree and some of the questions and we challenge some of these limiting beliefs or the truth in them, is the impossibility of things. I've always spent much of my career trying to be what I call a problem eliminator. I'll hear from leadership, hey, we don't have enough of these types of results or these metrics or these, we're not performing well in this area. We don't have enough pipeline. I work in a sales environment. Compare and contrast that to recruiting and hiring. Hey, we're having a lot of challenges finding people here. And so I've prided myself in challenging some of those norms. Mm-hmm. What would you say, Hylke, to somebody who feels like they're addressing a lot of the crocodilian voices in certain areas and challenging the norm, but can't do that with their own self?
So first of all, welcome. Welcome to the human family. It's so much easier to look around than to look in. It's just, like our glasses want to look out. We are so outwardly focused. So that's part of our conditioning also to do that. So just to look, the very act of looking in is in a way radical for our human evolution, that we have the capacity to do it and then that we choose to do it. So that's the first point, right? And then the second thing is, so when we start looking inside, be great if we just looked inside and it was all peaceful and loving and joyful and strong and feeling like on top of the world, almost like an Instagram perfect picture of your inside. That would be great if we found that, if we went inside. However, what we find when we go inside is a whole plethora of stuff. Some of it can be comfortable, some of it can be not so comfortable. So then you mentioned this thing of the tree, then we can use different tools like the tree, and the tree is simply a tool to go and say, okay, let's look a little deeper. And let me give you an example, right? So let's say we have an example of a behavior that we want to change. Like the outward behavior is often a symptom of something inside of us that we can look at. So if there's an outward behavior that's limiting us, let's say for me, it's, which I describe in the book, it's like what I'm working on continuously is whatever I do has to be perfect, right? That's the behavior. And then just like that's like the top of the tree. And then we go into the roots of the tree and saying, so what happens inside of Hylke when he thinks whatever I do has to be perfect and therefore I do things alone, right? I feel anxious. So there's a level of feeling I found. There's a sense of anxiety and this deep sort of thinking that it has to be perfect. And when I go a little deeper, it's not only that it has to be perfect, but I have to be perfect. Like, for example, my brain noticed that my glasses were up a little lopsided when I started this podcast. It's like, oh, I got to fix that. Do I have to fix that? Nobody cares. Maybe people care, right? But it's so funny what we do. So I have to be perfect. I should be perfect at all times. And then we go a little deeper. It's almost like going into your body. You can feel this also at the cellular level, feel this contraction. And then you notice, maybe in my case, I should be perfect. Well, why do I hold on to that belief? Well, then we get often to these very universal needs, like I want to belong, or that's my currency for belonging, or I want to be loved, or I want to make sure that my life adds up to something. Any of those. So we do this inquiry of the tree to become aware of what lies underneath, and then we don't stop there, but then we use the tool of truth inquiry and say, okay, so is it true that I should be perfect or else I will not be loved? Well, how do I behave when I believe that? Well, I'm completely rigid. I am not here. So it doesn't seem to be super effective. I mean, it drives me, but it's not driving me to be all I can be. And is it true that I will not be loved when I'm perfect? Well, it's interesting. That's kind of conditional love, which I don't want to sign up for anyway.
Wow, that's powerful. And I would say too, Hylke, what I'm hearing is the truth inquiry is very impactful when you're looking at not only yourself and some of these very entrenched patterns, things that have been with us since early days and upbringing, and even generations prior, and when they were infused into our bloodline, all the way to some of those ways that we challenge the truths that we see every day. Hearing from colleagues, oh, this is impossible. And so we almost feel that victimhood and, fight the inclination to just give in and give up to that because everybody else is doing it. And I think that's why it's so important to often shrink your bubble in those situations and challenge yourself through the exercise of the tree. Let's split off at that point and let's talk more about how do we transform some of these patterns that are deeply entrenched in us.
Yeah. Well, first of all, is the willingness to do it. Andrew Bloom, who was the leader of this consulting company called the Triumph Group, said this so beautifully. Like, we grow by coming face to face within us what we're very tired of. And that, like, what are you really tired of? Like, what is a behavior that you're really tired of? In other words, you feel it's like, maybe that was good for that stage of my life, but I'm not going to do that anymore. What is that? So that is the beginning to, you see that find the wherewithal. It's like, what's not working for me anymore? And I might be getting some feedback. I might actually need to change something because otherwise I'm going to lose my job if I don't, or some of that. And then we go through the process of being very honest with ourselves and saying, and digging a little deeper and saying, I have a behavior that I want to shift. Let's say we have a very difficult goal, right? Then I'm going to ask myself, so what is the behavior that I engage into and with that makes it harder for me to achieve this goal? Like, one of my goals is, my crocodile isn't like this, to build the team in Growth Leaders Network around me out, where I'm not involved in everything anymore. Well, what's the behavior that I need to shift in that situation? Well, having to do it alone, having to be soloist, basically, is a big one. And I could just say as a New Year's resolution, I'm not going to do this anymore. But then I have to look inside and say, what is the belief? That's keeping me from actually letting go of this solo behavior, which is I should be perfect or whatever. And then I go to the work of transformation further, which is saying, is that true? And ask the question, who would I be without it? And what would be a different belief that's more true? So let's test this for a second, because you brought up the belief of like, I should always have the foot on the pedal, like the pedal on the metal, always, or else. I invite you for a second, Carson, to consider, what if that belief was no longer running through your mind? It's just in your mind. It's between your ears, right? So let's say it was physically impossible for you to have that belief running through your head. What would that be like?
I have no idea.
Just try in this moment. It's a very intuitive.
There's an element of it that's freeing, but there's another element of it that's absolutely terrifying, right? Because I know the results that I've been able to produce as a result of always having the pedal to the metal, as you know, always being active, always being busy. But it's interesting too, because as I was rereading the text, you know, there's some questions here. You use being busy as an example, and you've got a series of 9 questions. And as you actually internalize these and you ask them to yourself, you know, number 1, is it true that you should be busy? Okay, yes, I should be busy. But then when I think about it, okay, well, how busy? You start to actually analyze the truth behind some of the truths. Is it true that you should be perfect? No. But I also acknowledge that that's a guise that I have often adopted in my life and in my career. And I've been very selective in who I've let see behind the armor, right? Very selective. And for a litany of reasons. You know, I think we've all had situations where we've overshared in personal or in work situations, and it's been used against us. And so we're reluctant to revisit that. We don't want to feel that way again. And so there's reasons that we have the guard up, but we also know the value of being vulnerable with teammates and people that we work with, because the reality is they're not going to trust you if they view you as somebody who just wears a mask, and so on and so forth. But I found a lot of real value in walking through these and just sitting in the questions long enough to let my brain pick apart what my responses would be.
I love that. Maybe after the break, we do this practice of what can be called the work. It was developed by another teacher called Byron Katie, and take a look at some of those challenging beliefs. Maybe this pesky one, I have to keep the pedal on the metal at all times, and see what becomes possible.
I love that. Right before break, I want to address, we got a couple of really good questions in the chat, exploring how we operate from true self. We all know that there are truths and untruths when operating outside of ourselves and interacting with others. How do we hold fast to the truth when looking through our internal lens with ourselves? And frankly, I think a big part of the response there, Hylke, that we've kind of uncovered is being able to address those things in the moment. I can tell you over my life and career, I've become a lot less reactionary because I always felt like I immediately had to be the smartest person in the room. It was the environment. It was the environment I grew up in and started my career in. It was the culture at that time. I had to be the smartest person in the room. I had to make the immediate right decision because all eyes were on me to do that. But why? Do I have to make an immediate decision? So I think sitting in these challenges and some of these untruths and being able to acknowledge them and rationalize them, it's a new muscle for many of us. So like anything, while you're developing new muscle and developing muscle, it becomes a lot more part of your life as it becomes more repetitive.
I love that. Sitting in. It's not a discussion. It's an inquiry. It's a contemplation, sitting with it long enough so that the truth reveals itself about the untruths also within ourselves. I'd say let's take a break.
Beautiful. Let's do.
You are listening to the Crocodile School podcast, where we are exploring connecting deeply to our true selves, especially when challenged. If If you would like to learn more about leadership and team connectedness and taming the crocodiles that get in the way of leading from our true selves, please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now back to the Crocodile School podcast with your hosts, Hylke Faber and Carson V. Heady.
All right, so we're back. So this is my favorite part, the coaching segment, where we pick something that I'm grappling with in real time to dive into. Hylke, where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with the pesky one. So let's just start at this belief that you just shared, which is I have to always keep striving. How would you say your belief?
Yeah, and I think this is a common one, right? You articulated it so well in the book, and it's a lifelong journey for me, right? I'm continuing. We're all works in progress, but I've always felt, starting out, it was a need for me to prove myself, prove my worth to my parents, prove myself to the people I grew up with and around in a community. And then from there, you add more. You add more people. There's people that you work for. There's employers. There's family. There's friends. There's expectations. You get married. You have kids. You want to be the right partner and spouse, role model. You hope that some of your work ethic will rub off on your children who want completely different things, right? There's only so many things that you can control. And in those moments, your fear, your very real fear becomes, if I take my foot off the gas pedal and there's these 30 people that I care about watching, what if during that moment that my foot's off the gas pedal, somebody watches and I negatively impact that relationship that I care so much about? And that's what it's always been for me is, fear of a number being next to my name on a sales scorecard or spreadsheet that isn't indicative of my best effort, or a relationship in my life suffering because I'm not able to put the maximum amount of food on the table.
So you could say that the core belief here within you, one of them is, I should always strive, otherwise I will fail and disappoint.
That's it.
All right. So let's do the questions and the turnaround. So is it true? Question number one. Is it true, Carson, that if you're not striving, you'll disappoint and fail?
I don't know.
You don't know. Second question then. Can you absolutely know that it's true that without striving, you'll fail and disappoint?
No, because I've never tried it that way.
So you can't absolutely know, right? You can't. That's a very powerful question. Absolutely means from all perspectives, from all ages, from all times, from anyone. And it's like, no, can't really know that. So then the third question is, how do you behave and react when you're under the influence of this belief? I should keep striving, otherwise I'll fail and disappoint. How do you react?
Yeah, it's like a fuel. You have to be driving hard to the basket or to the end zone or whatever analogy you want to make all the time, or something will slip through the cracks, something will suffer, something will fail, one of the balls will drop.
And now let's take a look at what's the impact on your reality. And I'd like to slice reality in those three pieces: the I, the we, and the it. So what's the impact on you, on yourself, Carson, to always have to strive, keep the balls in the air? What's that like for you inside?
It depends on the moment, because some moments you're able to do it better than others. I think there's some good learning that you take along the way that you can apply to individual situations. And like rubber bands, I think we expand, right? You reach a point where your threshold for pain or your tolerance for this is higher, but eventually you snap. Eventually you reach a point where you're exhausted, you're burnt out, you're at your wit's end. Pick one, right? those are very common realities. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now with leaders. You know, we're all, we've had our world turned on its head the last few years. And so we're all grappling and we're all thinking we're okay in whatever moment. But these types of things can sneak up on you. And when all of these controllables that we're trying to control don't yield the outcome we desire, it has us questioning everything.
Yes, yes. So notice there's something actually beautiful in the striving, which is, it stretches. There's something about what you can actually contribute, and left untamed, it becomes and you become exhausted. What's the impact on your relationships, on the we?
No, they all suffer because you're not your best self for those other relationships. Like, I'll be very candid. It's kind of like, and we've talked about this before, it's kind of like a very diversified stock portfolio. You have all these things that matter to you. You've got your faith, your family, your friendships, your career, side hobbies, whatever it is. You invest in each of them, but you can't control what's going to transpire in those relationships. You may invest a lot into your career thinking it's going to help all these other things. But in that point, and even in your book, you articulate this, by doing that consciously, you're alienating some of these other relationships. So I'm not showing up as my best self or acknowledging my wife where she wants to be met. I'm not watching my kids' dance routine at that given moment because I'm late on a call trying to close a deal that I think is all that matters so that I can put food on the table. But they would probably like a little less food on the table and more of my attention and love. And so that's where we have blind spots, is we fail to see where people want to be met that we claim to care so much about in those moments. We're blind to all of their needs.
Blind, and maybe even also to our colleagues and our clients, right? It's very transactional when I'm always striving. It's about me accumulating for me. So how about the effectiveness? What happens with the impact on your effectiveness when you believe that striving? What happens?
There's a point where it diminishes, right? Who's to say where that is for each and every one of us? But there is absolutely a point where it diminishes. How could it not? You can't just run a machine or a vehicle until the end of time. Eventually, it's going to break down, and we all have our limits.
Yes. So it's a longer term limiting belief, is what I'm hearing, and it's a relationally limiting belief. So then we get to the question that most of us don't like, which is what we also started talking about before the break, which is, who would you be without this belief? Like, if you no longer physically, it was like, it's just a mental thing that you've trained yourself in, right? That I have to strive, otherwise I'll disappoint and fail. What if that no longer was part of your mental machinery? That was no longer possible. What would that be like for you?
That's a tough one to answer.
In this moment.
It's been a source of fuel for so long. I think it would be relearning so many things. It would be, there's an element, it's kind of like we talked about earlier. There's an element that's freeing, because in that moment, it's removing that, hey, wait a minute, what if I could take my foot off the gas pedal for a moment? There's a freeing nature of it that's almost like a warm blanket. Like, oh my gosh, like that would be amazing if I could just take a moment to, take a pause, take a breath, maybe do something else that fuels me. But at the same time, there's a very, that fear is so entrenched, in this case, intrinsically, that it's harder to challenge those norms, which is ironic, because a lot of the things that we were talking about earlier that are challenging outside norms, and some of the great leaders that you call out that have challenged outside norms, like Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., they challenged outside norms with great success, even though they stood against, things that had been staples of those eras. But we have the hardest time when it's doing the exact same thing in here.
Of course. And it's standing for something in us that we know is true, which automatically means that we will have to let go some things, and we become kind of disloyal to our tribal conditioning of what it means to be here, what it means to be accepted and loved and successful. I found it interesting that one of the words you used besides freeing was relearning. So notice that this question, who would I be without this, is a question of discovery. And my invitation to you and anybody else who's listening is to use this questioning as a question of discovery, not to find the answer necessarily, but just to be in it. Like, who would I be without this belief, whatever it is, that I can't do it, that I have to be perfect, that I have to please, that I have to strive, that I have to be the best, that I'm not amounting to anything, that I'm never going to get there, that I have to get somewhere, whatever it is. Who would you be without that? What becomes possible? And not to make that into the next law, next belief, but just sort of like, oh, sit with that. Allow that to play in your nervous system. Then we get to the fifth piece of the work. So the 4 questions are, is it true? 1. 2, can you absolutely know that it's true? 3, how do you behave under the influence of the belief? What's the impact on the I, we, and the it? And then, who would you be without it? And then there's this thing called the turnaround, number 5 in the sequence, which is a little reminder for our mind to consider something else, like a little refrigerator sticker, you know? So the belief you had, Carson, was I should strive, otherwise I'll fail and disappoint. Turn it around. What might be a turnaround of that? And a turnaround can be by just thinking about the opposite, or being and sitting with it and thinking about what is a more true statement that's more reflective of what's actually true. So what's a turnaround? I should strive, otherwise I'll fail. What's a turnaround?
I think a turnaround in this case would be leaning into the people that you're striving for, or the projects that you're striving for. Meet them where they are, do a little bit more exploration of what their need truly is and how you might be able to meet it differently. That doesn't require you to keep your foot on the gas pedal. It's interesting. This is something that's conjured up for me as I was thinking about a few years back, a colleague and mentor had told me, because you always get questions from so many different places. And what happens when we get a question from a colleague? Well, we want to answer, right? We want to find the answer. And a lot of times if we don't know the answer, we got to go do some digging and some homework. Right. And we feel stressed because we're working on something else, right, pulled in another direction. But you know what she told me? She said, you'll find that often they're going to be asking multiple people that same question. And what happens if you don't reply? They'll find the answer. And how often there's been where I didn't get back to somebody immediately, where I didn't cut into my dinner with my family to respond to someone. And when I finally did get back to them, they said, oh, I found the answer. You don't have to take the weight of the world on your shoulders. So I think that's the turnaround. And what I'm hearing and what I'm thinking about and internalizing right now is where can I personally apply that other places in my life with that same degree of impact?
Very good. So think about maybe a short, pithy statement that you can tell yourself to remind you when the old crocodile of strive, 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 otherwise I'll fail rears its head in you. What can you say to yourself? I
don't have to be the answer to everything. I don't have to supply the answer to everything.
I'm not the answer to everything. That's a great turnaround. So otherwise,
that's a powerful statement, because I think even just saying that and sitting in that is a very powerful thing. It's great that they see value in you, or me in this case, that I can answer a lot of these questions. However, I don't have to be the answer or the solution in every case.
Right. So as opposed to I strive, otherwise I'll fail, I'm hearing something about I am not the answer to everything. And I also hear, I humbly lean in.
I like that.
Humbly lean in. All right. Well, I see we are at time for today in our little exploration. What is your takeaway from today, Carson?
Well, this was a powerful one, Hylke, and I think I encourage everyone watching today and listening today to really look at those intrinsic and also external forces and questions and really challenge them. Do those truth inquiries on some of the biggest quandaries that you face internally and externally. And again, we're all works in progress. If you're able to make progress on a couple of these, you're well on your way to unlearning that fear and becoming even better, more optimal from a leadership perspective. And frankly, that's what we're all after. What are your closing thoughts, Hylke?
Strikes me as I think about truth, it expands. And narrowly focused leadership means like often I have to do it by myself now. That's often a common story. And when I put truth inquiry into it, I realize A, I'm not alone. B, it's not all up to me. C, I can do it with others. D, it doesn't all have to happen right now. And there's some wisdom that there's a space that opens for greater wisdom and greater connection with others. So if you're listening today, I know we covered a lot. I would just invite you to think about those two questions. What is a belief that I have that I feel is limiting me in some way or is uncomfortable? And then what becomes possible when I relax that belief? Don't even let it go completely, but relax it a little bit. What becomes possible?
Very well said, as always. Hylke, thank you so much for joining us on this. This has been a wonderful exercise and exploration into our unlocking our true leadership potential. And thank you all for joining the Crocodile School podcast today. Today we talked about truth inquiry. Next time we're going to explore chapter 7 from Taming Your Crocodiles, which is growing our owls in conversation. Owls being the voices of wisdom that can quell the impact that our crocodilian voices have. So join us next time. We'll have our next episode in late April. You can also join us for a live Growth Leaders Network community conversation, and look for these community conversations on LinkedIn from the Growth Leaders Network. Thank you for joining Hylke and me today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining the Crocodile School podcast with your hosts Hylke Faber and Carson V. Heady. Take a moment to pause and appreciate something about yourself. And enjoy taming your crocodiles, growing more and more into your true potential. See you next time at the Crocodile School.